Well, I went to a funeral on Friday to support someone in my networking group. And after the service, an elderly church member walked up to me and asked me what Jesus' last words were. And I said, well, his last words were, "It is finished." And he said, "That's correct. And any church that doesn't know that aren't real Christians." Then he turned and walked away. And I thought, well, this is strange. It's an odd conversation to have immediately following a memorial service. But then I thought death affects everybody just a little bit differently. And then I thought humans are the only animals that have the ability to conceptualize a life after death. We're the only ones. And this causes a lot of troubles. And the ability to think in future terms can be scary if you think you're going one place, happy if you think you're going another, and inconclusive if you have no idea. It can be intimidating, freeing, or liberating. And we're all going to be faced with the unpleasant thought of death at some point. And to help us deal with these unwelcome feelings, let's peer into the heart, the mind, the soul of the Messiah during his time of incredible pain and heartless humiliation. God clearly showed Jesus the amazing highlights of his life via a song written about him by David 1,000 years before Jesus was even born. And this song encapsulated Jesus' final thoughts. And these progression of these thoughts in this song are going to help us, or can help us, get through our hard times as well. See, his final thoughts can help us finally live. So now let's go to Psalm 22. And this is our only text of the day. And we're going to look into the mind of the Messiah. Part 1, Psalm 22, 1 through 21. His suffering. Now verses 1 through 21 discuss the life and suffering of the Messiah. Verses 22 through 31 tell of his and our future glory. So we're going to split this teaching in two. Now both Peter and Paul mention these sufferings and glory and this glory in the epistles multiple times. So verse 1 of Psalm 22. To the chief musician upon Elajeth Shahar, a psalm of David. Now the term Elajeth Shahar, it just sets a tempo with a song. It means a deer at daybreak. The tempo was alert and ready, heart rate up, if you're in a gym. And so address the problem. As we read Psalm 22, watch the progression of human thought during a crisis. We're all going to have crisis in life. And we're going to go from dark introspection to brilliance, from suffering to glory. Verse 1, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? Notice how this opening stanza sounds familiar to what Jesus said just moments before he died. Matthew 27:46 says, and about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now I know some of you have been taught a complicated adaptation of these Aramaic words. But let's read what the word actually says, and you may have a different opinion. Watch how this song takes the Messiah from the depth of despair all the way to ultimate and total victory way in the future. And this process is what all us humans should go through when we get hit hard with thoughts of our own demise. God, can you hear me? Do you hear the words of my roaring? Can't you tell that I'm moaning heavily here, God? See, Jesus was in real agony. What would it feel like to have been beaten within an inch of your life for hour upon hour, and you no longer looked or sounded like a human? Your skin had been peeled off, and you're hanging there, nailed to this post, naked. And it was during a great festival time when there was hundreds and thousands of people walking down that path, seeing you bloody and naked and ugly and beat. Your hands and your feet pierced through. It had to be horrendous. David saw this by revelation 1,000 years before it happened. Jesus saw it his whole life, every time he read that psalm. And that psalm is sung every year by the Jewish people at a certain holiday. David, by revelation, was inside the head of Jesus Christ in this song. He saw what Jesus was seeing. He heard what he was hearing. He may have even felt a little bit of what he felt. Have you ever watched a movie that made you cry? You felt something. You ever read a book that moved you so deeply you sort of felt pain? Yeah. Verse 2. Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season. I'm not silent. Now people are tempted to wonder if God's listening. And doesn't the Bible say that Jesus was tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin? He was tempted to wonder where God was. But he never gave in, he never gave up, and he never blamed God for his problems. So should we? No. What good's it going to do? You know, Jesus was a master of moving through his problems, knowing full well that there's always light at the end of a tunnel, even if that light is going to be in the future. People think their life should be perfect. Well, here's a life of a perfect man. That doesn't seem like perfection to me. You're not in control of what causes you pain a lot of times. You're just in control of how you deal with it. That's all we're responsible for, is how we deal with hurt, how we deal with ridicule, how we deal with pain, with loss, with death. See, next thing is, if they can do it, I can do it. This is the next step. First, we address our problem, and then we recall the precedent. I'm in pain. Others have been through similar things. If they can do it, I can do it. Psalm 22, verse 3. But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou didst deliver them. They cried unto thee, and were delivered. They trusted in thee, and were not confounded. See how he's moving past the opening phrase that mentioned how he felt he was forsaken? And now he's moving to a whole different level here. And we're going to see the progression through this whole psalm. So you evaluate your situation. It may not be good, but you have to evaluate it. That's what he's doing. You ever gotten in an accident? You have to look and you evaluate. Am I okay? You evaluate yourself. Well, that's what he was doing. Self-inventory. Now the song helps us see how to process pain, how to process hatred from people who are close to us, and how to process vicious attacks. Verse 6. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised of the people. Now this is the Messiah saying this. This is what David saw 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. Now this worm doesn't mean a little wiggly worm like we're thinking. This worm here in the Hebrew is the crimson beetle. And it's a species of beetle that would climb up in a tree, and then it would literally attach itself for the rest of its life. It would give birth, and then its young would live off of it. And then when it died, then the red fluids inside of it would stain the wood red. And they use this even today in some cultures to dye wool. And so David saw this. When he saw Jesus Christ, he looked like a crimson beetle. And the wood behind him looked like one after the death of a crimson beetle. And so David literally saw the red and bloodied body of Jesus Christ attached to a tree, and that reminded him of that crimson beetle. Imagine what he saw. What color was Jesus at that point? Red. Remember that this is a song about what David saw and heard by revelation from Christ's perspective. Verse 7. And all that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake their head, saying, he trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. Matthew 27:39 says, and those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads. David saw that. David saw the people doing that. Isn't that crazy? Verse 43 of Matthew 27 even tells us that some said in front of the crucified Christ, he trusted God. Let him deliver him now. So where did this psalm come from? It came from what he heard when he was inside the mind of Christ by revelation. Isn't that something? David saw and heard this 1,000 years before Christ was crucified. David saw a vivid live video audio feed from the eyes and ears of the future Christ. Now talk about getting into somebody's head. Imagine feeling what he felt, seeing what he saw, hearing what he heard. Now we recognize and remember the care of God. Verse 9. But thou art he that took me out of the womb. Thou didst make me hope when I was upon my mother's breasts. I was cast upon thee from the womb. Thou art my God from my mother's belly. People say that their life flashes before their eyes when they're in the throes of death. You ever heard that? Now, David saw Jesus relive his earliest memories of his mother's love for him. A newborn baby is usually handed to the mother and set right on her breasts, even while the umbilical cord is still attached. But the mind picture here is that she then hands the baby to his father, who's God. That's David's mind picture. Verse 11, be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. In other words, God, I'm glad you're close by. You're the only one who can help me get through this. Now, does that sound like thou hast forsaken me? No, this is the progression of thought. We always start there. Okay, God, where are you? What's going on now? All right. Other people are going through this same kind of thing, have gone through it, so I can go through this. Okay? I know that you've watched my back since I was born, since before I was born. I'm glad you're close by. I need you to help me through this. Verse 12, many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They've surrounded him. Now, bulls of Bashan were wild, free-ranging bulls from the east of the Jordan River. Today we call it Syria. And it's sort of like the tough, wild, and free Texas Longhorns that overran Texas before the Civil War and that basically fed America right after the Civil War. There was millions of them. Well, there was a lot of them, these bulls of Bashan. Now, wild bull is different than a tame one. Wild means wild. You know, wild resists restraint. Wild does not play well with humans. A truly wild animal can never be tamed. It can be controlled, but it can't be tamed. And the word strong in verse 12 is at times used in reference to angels or spirit beings. So what David is seeing here is more than just wild and powerful bulls. Here it could mean he's surrounded by a herd of wild men or spirits who are manipulated by strong devil spirits that don't play well with people who love the light. And if you don't think you get affected, That's why our life stays miserable sometimes. We don't analyze the situation. Where does this really come from? Do you really wrestle against flesh and blood, or is it coming from somewhere else? We know the Bible says it's from principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness from on high. See, David was well aware of the extremely tall people that lived in Bashan, which was east of Galilee during the days of Moses. And this is where they got those great big fruits. Remember that? Where it took 2 men to carry 1 bunch of grapes. Well, the people who lived there were equally large. And the famous King Og of Bashan was a giant of a man, as were many of his people. In fact, the Israelites said that these people made them feel like grasshoppers. You've been around a bunch of big men. Maybe you've seen them play professional basketball. Those are some tall men. 7 foot's tall. This guy's taller. 7 foot's short to this guy. His bed was described as being 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. Now, a little guy doesn't need a 13-foot bed. You put 4 or 5 little guys in that bed. You know, this was a big guy. Now, Goliath was small in comparison, at only 10 feet tall. And David remembered that with God's help, he put Goliath out of his misery. And David was a teenager. So that's what David thought when he saw this. He thought of these evil people that he was watching hover around Jesus, who manipulated this whole thing. He thought of them like the wild bulls of Bashan, like the wild evil people that attacked Israel for years. He thought of Goliath and that size and compared him to God. See, super evil men are what wild bulls of Bashan represented to David and to the Christ in Psalm 22. This is not just talking about the size of a man, it's talking about the size of their demonic influence on society. Just turn on the TV. Trust me, it's affecting you. Listen, look at the music we listen to. Some of the words that are in there. Look at politics. Oh my God. Start a war over here. Let's start a war over here. Let's start a war over here. Let's just send a bunch of young men and women over there to die so we can have a few things that we want, so we can prove a point. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Except for we convince everybody that it's the right thing to do. And maybe there's a time and a place for that, but that's not the point here. This is not just talking about the size of a man, it's their demonic influence. Who around Jesus' time might have fit this untamable description of evil men? Who hated him the most? Well, sadly, the meanest people on earth are usually the most religious. Just turn on the TV. Who's causing the biggest problems in the world society today? It's super fundamentally religious people. A fundamentalist always wants you to look backwards, wants to bring something to a time that was way back when that had to be better than it is now. That's not what Christianity is. We move forward. There are fundamental Christians who always want you looking in your rearview mirror. We're not talking about that. It's free, it's flowing, it's moving ahead, it's moving, it's grooving. It's got to be. Look how Jesus lived. It was like nobody ever saw the freedom he lived and the love with which he lived it. Religious people still are the most evil people on earth. Now, it's important to acknowledge the hurt and recognize who's really behind the attack. And this is the process he's going through. I'm hurting. I feel alone. Where are you, God? I drive my mind to remember that you've helped many others. I'm surrounded by some really evil people here doing some really bad things to me right now, God. But I realize where this attack's coming from. It's not from you. Verse 13, they gaped upon me with their mouth as a ravening and roaring lion. You've all seen lions in a feeding frenzy on TV, haven't you? You know, these religious leaders couldn't wait to kill him. They're in a frenzy, foaming at the mouth. It was like a killing frenzy once they finally got him staked there. The religious leaders and the spirits that drove them are the wild bulls of Bashan. And this is how David saw things, through the eyes of the Christ in Psalm 22. They were tearing chunks off their victim, and he literally had chunks pulled off of him. David must have been in Jesus' memory banks, mental flashes of Jesus' beatings. He probably think Jesus was reflecting. I mean, how would you not think about that stuff? Well, David was thinking it right along with him. How long he saw that stuff by revelation, I don't know. 14. I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It's melted into the midst of my bowels. You ever feel like, when you get that sour, ugly stomach, when something bad happened, you know what I'm talking about? That's what this is saying. It's like your whole life is just right there in the middle of you. It's just melted. Jesus said I'm totally drained and I'm in pain. My bones have been pulled out from their joints. What did the Roman soldiers do to this man? It's horrendous. Imagine the pain of your bones being pulled from their sockets. You ever seen anybody who dislocated a shoulder? Were they like, oh, that's nothing? No. Imagine your hips being dislocated and your knees being dislocated and your wrist. They dislocated him, man. It's probably why he couldn't walk to carry that wooden stake. He couldn't walk. If everything's dislocated, he probably couldn't walk. Now you get it. Verse 15. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws. And thou hast brought me into the dust of death. I'm so dry that my tongue sticks to my mouth. I'm right at the verge of death. John 19:28 says that Jesus was thirsty. Well, that's an understatement. Jesus said, I thirst. It wasn't like he was a little bit thirsty. He'd been bleeding out. He was dehydrated. God showed David that Jesus Christ was thirsty. I wonder if David felt that thirst. How would he have known? Peripheral attacks. Now he breaks down the attack even further. He sees that the soldiers, like it or not, are doing just what they're told to do. Like the Nazis. I just did what I was supposed to, what they told me to do. Japanese soldiers, same thing. Most soldiers do. But I mean, these guys they were just doing what they're told to do. Verse 16, for dogs have compassed me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. Now what's he picturing? Now it says dogs have surrounded me. Now, in reality, when the Romans crucified people, they would leave them hanging there. And the wild dogs would literally rip the meat off of the bodies as they hung there. And the birds would peck out the eyes and eat the lips and stuff. I mean, it was nasty stuff, this crucifixion thing. But he hadn't been there long enough for the dogs to be there. So this dogs meant something else. Dogs aren't typically wild, by the way. Feral dogs are dogs that have been abandoned or ran away from their humans and now run with some mischievous pack. I've seen them, folks. And they're nasty. I lived on a campus that had a pack of feral dogs. And they would have a loudspeaker announcement, don't leave the buildings. The dogs are back. And feral dogs can usually be re-domesticated in one generation. If you took a puppy from a feral dog and raised it in your house, it would act like any other house dog. A wild animal like the bulls of Bashan or a lion can never be domesticated. You cannot witness to a devil spirit and tame it. You can't. You cannot convert the devil to Christianity, no matter how slick of a talker you think you are. There's some people you'll never get to. You can't. There's some ugly stuff on the internet about Christianity and about the Christ. I was shocked. You know, I'm always shocked when I read this stuff. The hatred people have. They're wild. These are people who've allowed themselves, these dogs are people who've allowed themselves to be manipulated by wild people born of the seed of the serpent. That's, a dog is somebody who allows himself to be manipulated. So it's good to walk on your own feet and to say what you need to say. David and Jesus were well aware of what was really happening behind the scenes, and we should be aware too. David saw, David heard, and David possibly felt the pain of the crucifixion. Now, on a side note, David actually saw by revelation actually what a fully armed Roman soldier looked like. And there were no Roman soldiers 1,000 years BC. The Romans didn't occupy Israel until 69 BC. Roman soldiers always had to wear all their gear, which means David saw all the equipment and weaponry from 1,000 years in the future. What do you think the weapon designers of today what would they pay to have a glimpse of a weapon from 1,000 years from now? That's what David saw. 17, I may tell all my bones, they look and stare at me. See, David, through the eyes of Jesus, could literally see some of Jesus' exposed bones. They had literally pulled the meat off of his bones. Imagine Mary having to witness that. Those whips were horrible. See, David was also aware that Jesus was his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. He knew this. Verse 18, they part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. Now, what is he seeing here? David saw the Roman soldiers gambling for Jesus' clothes that they had stripped off of him 1,000 years before it happened. David saw that and wrote it down in a song. That's incredible. Doesn't it say they did that in the Gospels? Yeah. David saw that. Jesus Christ knew he was going to be naked, pinned up to something, and bleeding on a post like that crimson beetle, and he decided to do it anyway. Most of us, if we knew something like that was going to happen, exit stage left. We'll refocus and ask God for help again. Here's the next one. At first, we're shocked and we wonder, why me? Then we realize that the attack was not because God allowed it, but because we have a vicious and deadly enemy that hates anyone who loves the light. At first, we reflect inwardly, but now we turn our attention back to God for help. Verse 19 and 20. But be thou not far from me, O Lord, O my strength. Haste thee to help me. Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. Now he's not calling God darling. My darling means my one and only. My one and only God. Jesus had one God. I worship the God that Jesus worshiped. I don't mix that one up. You see, you are my one and only God. You're my one and only chance. Notice a transition from the words forsaken me in verse 1 to my one and only God. Does that sound like he's forsaken? No, it's just the process of thinking. That's what this whole psalm's about. It's how to take yourself from the depths of despair and get your mind out of it and get your mind to victory, from sufferings to glory. My one and only God. It's a progression. He knows God didn't forsake him and doesn't forsake him and never will forsake him. It's just part of the hymn. The song is building to a crescendo. Verse 21, save me from the lion's mouth, for thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorn. Now, this is not a pretty magical unicorn that walks on rainbows and has his pink tail brushed by little suburban girls. Okay? The word unicorn just means wild ox in the Hebrew. Okay? Plus you see horns in plural there, not singular. And now, fun fact, did you know that this Psalm 22 is quoted for or sung in part during the Jewish New Year celebration called Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Tishri? And this is when they blow the shofars and the hollowed out ram's horns. And some people say that Tishri 1 was the day Jesus was born. Well, this finishes up the first part of Psalm 22. The attention given to his suffering ends now. And now a new mindset's going to evolve, totally focused on victory. We've gotten past the hurt. We realize the attack was spiritual in nature. We call and know God is going to help us. Our mind is totally focused now on ultimate and total victory. We felt the pain, and now we see our amazing glory.